Hello! We are once again reading Mort, a Discworld novel. Terry Pratchett. Page 85. Princess Kelly awoke. There had been a sound like someone making no noise at all. Forget peas and mattresses. Sheer natural selection had established over the years that the royal families had survived longest were those whose members could distinguish an assassin in the dark by the noise he was clever enough not to make, because in court circles there was always someone ready to cut the air with a knife. She lay in bed, wondering what to do next. There was a dagger under her pillow. She started to slide one hand up the sheets, while peering around the room with half-closed eyes in search of unfamiliar shadows. She was well aware that if she indicated in any way that she was not asleep, she would never wake up again. Some light came into the room from the big window at the far end, but the suits of armor, tapestries, and assorted paraphernalia that littered the room could have provided cover for an army. The knife had dropped down beneath the bedhead. She probably wouldn't have used it properly anyway. Sneeze. Screaming for the guards, she decided, was not a good idea. If there was anyone in the room, then the guards must have been overpowered, or at least stunned by a large sum of money. There was a warming pan on the flagstones by the... Oh my god, I gotta sneeze. There was a warming pan on the flagstones by the fire. Would it make a weapon? There was a faint, metallic sound. Perhaps screaming wouldn't be such a bad idea after all. The window imploded. For an instant, Kelly saw, framed against a hell of blue and purple flames, a hooded figure crouched in the back of the largest horse she had ever seen. There was someone standing by the bed, with a knife half raised. In slow motion, she watched, fascinated, as the arm went up and the horse galloped at glacier speed across the floor. Now the knife was above her, starting its descent, and the horse was rearing, and the rider was standing in the stirrups and swinging some sort of weapon, and its blade tore through the slow air with a noise like a finger on the rim of wet glass. The light vanished. There was a soft thump on the floor, followed by a metallic clatter. Kelly took a deep breath. A hand was briefly laid across her mouth, and a worried voice said, "If you scream, I'll regret it. Please? I'm in enough trouble as it is. I think this is Mort." Anyone who could get that amount of bewildered pleading into their voice was either genuine or such a good actor they wouldn't have to bother with assassination for a living. She said, "Who are you?" "I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you," said the voice. "You are still alive, aren't you?" She bit down the sarcastic reply just in time. Something about the tone of the question worried her. "Can't you tell?" she said. "It's not easy." There was a pause. She strained to see in the darkness, to put a face around that voice. "I may have done you some terrible harm," it added. "Haven't you just saved my life?" "I don't know what I have saved, actually. Is there some light around here?" The maid sometimes leaves matches on the mantelpiece," said Kelly. She felt the presence beside her move away. There were a few hesitant footsteps, a couple of thumps, and finally a clang, although the word isn't sufficient to describe the real ripe cacophony of falling metal that filled the room. It was even followed by the traditional little tinkle of a couple of seconds after you thought it was all over. The voice said, rather indistinctly, "I'm under a suit of armor. Where should I be?" Kelly slid quietly out of bed, felt her way towards the fireplace, located the bundle of matches by the faint light from the dying fire, struck one in a burst of sulphurous smoke, lit a candle, found the pile of dismembered armor, pulled its sword from its scabbard, and then nearly swallowed her tongue. Something had just blown hot and wetly in her ear. "That's Binky," said the heat. "He's just trying to be friendly. I expect he'd like some hay if you got any." With royal self-control, Kelly said, "This is the 4th floor. It's a lady's bedroom. You'd be amazed at how many horses we don't get up here. Ow! Can you help me up, please? She put the sword down and pulled aside a breastplate. A thin, white face stared back at her. First, you'd better tell me why I shouldn't send for the guards anyway, she said. Even being in my bedroom could get you tortured to death. She glared at him. Finally, he said, Well, could you let my hand free, please? Thank you. Firstly, the guards probably won't see me. Secondly, you'll never find out why I'm here. And you look as though you'd hate not to know. And thirdly... Thirdly what? She said. His mouth opened and shut. Mort wanted to say, Thirdly, you're so beautiful, or at least very attractive, or anyway, far more attractive than any girl I've ever met, although admittedly I haven't met very many. From this, it will be seen that Mort's innate honesty will never make him a poet. If Mort ever compared to a girl to a simmer this day, it would be followed by a thoughtful explanation of what day he had in mind and whether it was raining at the time. In the circumstances, it was just as well that he couldn't find his voice. Kelly held up the candle and looked at the window. It was whole. The stone frames were unbroken. Every pane with its stained glass representatives of the Stow-Lot coat of arms was complete. She looked back at Mort. Never mind, thirdly, she said. Let's get back to secondly. An hour later, dawn reached the city. Daylight on the disk flows rather than rushes, because light is slowed right down by the world's standing magical field. Let me read that again. An hour later, dawn reached the city. Daylight on the disk flows rather than rushes, because light is slowed right down by the world's standing magical field, and it rolled across the flat lands like a golden sea. The city on the mound stood out like a sand castle in the tide for a moment, until the day swirled around it and crept onwards. Mort and Kelly sat side by side on her bed. The hourglass lay between them. There was no sand left in the top bulb. Ooh. I still don't understand this. Does this mean I'm dead or something, or doesn't it? It means you ought to be dead, he said. According to fate or whatever, I haven't really studied the theory. And you should have killed me. No! No, the assassin should have killed you. I did try to explain all that, said Mort. Why didn't you let him? Mort looked up at her in horror. Did you want to die? Of course I didn't, but it looks as though what people want doesn't come into it, does it? I'm trying to be sensible about this. Mort stared at his knees. Then he stood up. I think I'd better be going, he said coldly. I think I'd better be going. He folded up the scythe and stuck it into his sheath behind the saddle. Then he looked at the window. You came through that, said Kelly, hopefully. Look, when I said, does it open? No, there's a balcony along the passage, but people will see you. Mort ignored her, pulled open the door, and led Binky out into the corridor. Kelly ran after them. A maid stopped, curtsied, and frowned slightly as her brain wisely dismissed the sight of a very large horse walking along the carpet. The balcony overlooked one of the inner courtyards. Mort glanced over the parapet and then mounted. Watch out for the Duke, he said. He's behind all this. My father always warned me about him, said the princess. I've got a food taster. You should get a bodyguard as well, said Mort. I must go. I have important things to do. Farewell, he added, in what he hoped was the right tone of injured pride. Shall I see you again, said Kelly. There's lots I want to... That might not be a good idea, if you think about it, said Mort haughtily. He clicked his tongue, and Binky leapt into the air, cleared the parapet, and cantered up into the blue morning sky. I wanted to say thank you, Kelly yelled after him. The maid, who couldn't get over the feeling that something was wrong and had followed her, said, Are you all right, ma'am? Kelly looked at her distractedly. What? She demanded. I just wondered if everything was all right. Kelly's shoulders sagged. No, she said. Everything's all wrong. There's a dead assassin in my bedroom. Could you please have something done about it? And she held up a hand. I don't want you to say dead, ma'am, or assassin, ma'am, or scream or anything. I just want you to get something done about it. Quietly. I think I've got a headache, so just nod. The maid nodded, bobbed uncertainly, and backed away. Mort wasn't sure how he got back. The sky simply changed from ice blue to sullen gray as Binky eased himself into the gap between dimensions. He didn't land on the dark soil of Death's estate. It was simply there, underfoot, as though an aircraft carrier had gently maneuvered itself under a jump jet to save the pilot all the trouble of touching down. The great horse trotted into the stable yard and halted outside the double door, swishing its tail. Mort slid off and ran for the house, and stopped and ran back and filled the hayrack and ran for the house and stopped and muttered to himself and ran back and rubbed the horse down and checked the water bucket and ran for the house and ran back and fetched the horse blanket down from the hook on the wall and buckled it on. Binky gave him a dignified nuzzle. No one seemed to be about as Mort slipped in by the back door and made his way to the library, where even at this time of night the air seemed to be made of hot, dry dust. It seemed to take years to locate Princess Kelly's biography, but he found it eventually. It was a depressingly slim volume on a shelf only reachable by the library ladder, a wheeled, rickety structure that strongly resembled an early siege engine. With trembling fingers, he opened it at the last page and groaned. The princess's assassination at the age of 15, he read, was followed by the union of Stolat with Stohelet, and indirectly the collapse of the city-states of the Central Plain and the rise of... He read on, unable to stop. Occasionally he groaned again. Finally, he put the book back, hesitated, and then shoved it behind a few other volumes. He could still feel it there as he climbed down the ladder, shrieking its incriminating existence to the world. There were a few ocean-going ships on the disk. No captain liked to venture out of sight of a coastline. It was a sorry fact that ships which looked from a distance as though they were going over the edge of the world, weren't in fact disappearing over the horizon. They were in fact dropping over the edge of the world. Yeah, this is one of the few things where flat Earth theory is actually true. Welcome to the live reading for anyone who's watching. It's a guy reading a book that he got from the library. Every generation or so, a few enthusiastic explorers doubted this and set out to prove it wrong. Strangely enough, none of them had ever come back to announce the result of their researches. The following analogy would therefore have been meaningless to Mort. He felt as if he'd been shipwrecked on the Titanic, but in the nick of time had been rescued by the Lusitania. He felt as though he'd thrown a snowball on the spur of the moment and watched the ensuing avalanche engulf 3 ski resorts. He felt history unraveling all around him. He felt he needed someone to talk to quickly. That had to mean either Albert or Isabel, because he thought of explaining everything to those tiny blue pinpoints was not one he cared to contemplate after a long night. On the rare occasions Isabel deigned to look in his direction, she made it clear that the only difference between Mort and a dead toad was the color. As for Albert... Alright, not the perfect confidant, but definitely the best in a field of one. Mort slid down the steps and threaded his way back through the bookshelves. A few hours' sleep would be a good idea, too. Then he heard a gasp, the brief patter of running feet, and the slam of a door. When he peered around the nearest bookcase, there was nothing there except a stool with a couple of books on it. He picked one up and glanced at the name, then read a few pages. There was a damp lace handkerchief lying next to it. Mort rose late and hurried towards the kitchen, expecting at any moment the deep tones of disapproval. Nothing happened. Albert was at the stone sink, gazing thoughtfully at his chip pan, probably wondering whether it was time to change the fat or let it bide for another year. He turned as Mort slid into a chair. "You had a busy time of it then," he said. "Gallivanting all over the place until all hours, I heard. I could do you an egg. Oh, there's porridge." "Egg, please," said Mort. He never plucked up the courage to try Albert's porridge, which led a private life of its own in the depths of his saucepan in 8 spoons. "The master wants to see you after," Albert added, "but he said you wasn't to rush." "Ow!" Mort stared at the table. "Did he say anything else?" He said he hadn't had an evening off in 1,000 years, said Albert. He was humming. I don't like it. I've never seen him like this.
Ow.
Mort took the plunge.
Albert, have you been here long?
Albert looked at him over the top of his spectacles. Maybe, he said. It's hard to keep track of outside time, boy. I've been here since just after the old king died.
Which king, Albert?
Arturolo, I think he was called. Little fat man. Squeaky voice. I only saw him the once, though.
Where was this?
In Unk, of course.
What? Said Mort. They don't have any kings in Ankh-Morpork. Everyone knows that.
This was back a bit, I said. This was back a bit, I said Albert. He poured himself a cup of tea from Death's personal teapot and sat down, a dreamy look in his crusted eyes. Mort waited expectantly. And there was kings in those days. Real kings, not like the sort you get now. They was monarchs, continued Albert, carefully pouring some tea into the saucer and fanning it primly with the end of his muffler. I mean, they was wise and fair, well, fairly wise. And they wouldn't think twice about cutting your head off soon as they look at you, he added approvingly. And all the queens were tall and pale and wore them balaclava helmet things.
Wimples?
Said Mort. Yeah, them. And the princesses were beautiful as the days long, and so noble they could pee through 12 mattresses.
What?
Albert hesitated. Something like that, anyway. Oh, I love language. Something like that, anyway, he conceded. And there was balls and tournaments and executions. Great days. He smiled dreamily at his memories. Not like the sort of days you get now, he said, emerging from his reverie with bad grace.
Have you got any other names, Albert? Said Mort.
But the brief spell had been broken, and the old man wasn't going to be drawn. Oh, I know, he snapped. Get Albert's name and you'll go and look him up in the library, won't you? Prying and poking. I know you skulking in there at all hours reading the laws of young women. The heralds of guilt must have flourished their tarnished trumpets in the depths of Mort's eyes, because Albert cackled and prodded him with a bony finger. You might at least put 'em back where you find 'em, he said. Not leave piles of 'em around for old Albert to put back. Anyway, it's not right ogling the poor dead things. It probably turns you blind.
But I only...
Mort began, and remembered the damp lace handkerchief in his pocket and shut up. He left Albert grumbling to himself and doing the washing up, and slipped away into the library. Pale sunlight lanced down from the high windows, gently fading the covers of the patient ancient volumes. Occasionally, a speck of dust would catch the light as it floated through the golden shafts and flare like a miniature supernova. Mort knew that if he listened hard enough, he could hear the insect-like scritching of the books as they wrote themselves. Once upon a time, Mort would have found it eerie. Now it was reassuring. It demonstrated that the universe was running smoothly. His conscience, which had been looking for the opening, gleefully reminded him that, all right, it might be running smoothly, but it certainly wasn't heading in the right direction. He made his way through the maze of shelves to the mysterious pile of books, and found it was gone. Albert had been in the kitchen, and Mort had never seen Death himself enter the library. What was Isabelle looking for, then? He glanced up at the cliff of shelves about him, and his stomach went cold when he thought of what was starting to happen. There was nothing for it. He had to tell someone. What time do we have? Alright, 20 minutes. On average, one page takes 2 minutes. I've realized this. Kelly, meanwhile, was also finding life difficult. This was because causality had an incredible amount of inertia. Mort's misplaced thrusts, driven by anger and desperation, nascent love, had sent it down a new track, but it hadn't noticed yet. He'd kicked the tail of the dinosaur, but it wouldn't be some time before the other end realized it was time to say, ouch. Bluntly, the universe knew Kelly was dead, and was therefore rather surprised to find out that she hadn't stopped walking and breathing yet. It showed it in little ways. The courtiers, who gave her furtive, odd looks during the morning, would not have been able to say why the sight of her made them feel strangely uncomfortable. To their acute embarrassment and her annoyance, they found themselves ignoring her, or talking in hushed voices. The chamberlain found he'd instructed that the royal standard be flown at half-mast, and for the life of him couldn't explain why. He was gently led off to his bed with a mild nervous affliction after ordering 1,000 yards of black bunting for no apparent reason. The eerie, unreal feeling soon spread throughout the castle. The head coachman ordered the state beer to be brought out again and polished, and then stood in the stable-yard and wept into the chamois leather because he couldn't remember why. Servants walked softly along the corridors. The cook had to fight an overpowering urge to prepare simple banquets of cold meat. Dogs howled and then stopped, feeling rather stupid. The 2 black stallions who traditionally pulled the Stolat funeral cortege grew restive in their stalls and nearly kicked a groom to death. In his castle in Stohelet, the Duke waited in vain for a messenger who had in fact set out, but had stopped halfway down the street, unable to remember what it was he was supposed to be doing. Through all this, Kelly moved like a stolid and increasingly more irritated ghost. Things came to a head at lunchtime. She swept into the great hall and found no place had been set in front of the royal chair. By speaking loudly and distinctly to the butler, she managed to get that rectified, then saw dishes being passed in front of her before she could get a fork into them. She walked in sullen disbelief as the wine was brought in and poured first for the lord of the privy closet. It was an unregal thing to do, but she stuck out a foot and tripped the wine waiter. He stumbled, muttered something under his breath, and stared down at the flagstones. She leaned the other way and shouted into the ear of the yeoman of the pantry, "Can you see me, man? Why are we reduced to eating cold pork and ham?" He turned aside from his hushed conversation with the lady of small hexagonal room in the north turret, gave her a long look in which shock made way for a sort of unfocused puzzlement, and said, "Why, yes, I can, Your Royal Highness," prompted Kelly. "Why, yes, Highness," he muttered. There was a heavy pause. Then, as if switched back on, he turned his back on her and resumed his conversation. Kelly sat for a while, white with shock and anger, then pushed the chair back and stormed away to her chambers. A couple of servants sharing a quick roll-up in the passage outside were knocked sideways by something they couldn't quite see. Kelly ran into her room and hauled on the rope that should have been sent the duty maid running from the sitting room at the end of the corridor. Nothing happened for some time, and then the door was pushed open slowly and a face peered in at her. She recognized the look this time, and was ready for it. She grabbed the maid by the shoulders and hauled her bodily into the room, slamming the door shut behind her. As the frightened woman stared everything but at Kelly, she hauled off and fetched her a stinging slap across the cheek. "Did you feel that? Did you feel that?" she shrieked. "What? You?" the maid whimpered, staggering backwards until she hit the bed and sitting down heavily on it. "Look at me! Look at me when I talk to you!" yelled Kelly, advancing on her. "You can see me, can't you? Tell me you can see me, or I'll have you executed." The maid stared into her terrified eyes. I can see you," she said. But what? What? Surely you're... I thought... "What did you think?" snapped Kelly. She wasn't shouting anymore. Her words came out like white-hot whips. The maid collapsed into a sobbing heap. Kelly stood, tapping her foot for a moment, and then shook the woman gently. "Is there a wizard in the city?" she said. "Look at me. At me. There's a wizard, isn't there? You girls are always skulking off to talk to wizards. Where does he live?" The woman turned a tear-stained face towards her, fighting against every instinct that told her the princess didn't exist. "Wizards, yes. Cutwell. In Wall Street." Kelly's lips compressed to a thin smile. She wondered where her cloaks were kept, but cold reason told her it was going to be a damn sight easier to find them herself than try to make her presence felt to the maid. She waited, watching closely as the woman stopped sobbing, looking around in a vague bewilderment, and hurried out of the room. "She's forgotten me already," she thought. She looked at her hands. She seemed sullen enough. It had to be magic. She wandered into her robing room and experimentally opened a few cupboards until she found a black cloak and hood. She slipped them on and darted out into the corridor and down the servants' stairs. She hadn't been this way since she was little. This was the world of linen cupboards, bare floors, and dumbwaiters. It smelled of slightly stale crusts. Kelly moved through it like an earthbound spook. She was aware of the servants' quarters, of course, in the same way that people are aware at some level in their minds of the drains or the guttering, and she would be quite prepared to concede that although servants all look pretty much alike, they must have some distinguishing features by which their nearest and dearest could, presumably, identify them. But she was not prepared for sights like for Mog Hedron, the wine butler, whom he had hitherto seen only as a stately presence, moving like a galleon under full sail, sitting in his pantry with his jacket undone and smoking a pipe. A couple of maids ran past her without a second glance, giggling. She hurried on, aware that in some strange way she was trespassing in her own castle. And that, she realized, was because it wasn't her castle at all. The noisy world around her, with its steaming laundries and chilly still rooms, was its own world. She couldn't own it. Possibly it owned her. She took a chicken leg from the table in the biggest kitchen, a cavern lined with so many pots that by the light of its fires it looked like an armory for tortoise, and felt that unfamiliar thrill of theft. Theft! In her own kingdom! And the cook looked straight through her, eyes as glazed as judged ham. Kelly ran across the stable yards and out of the back gate, past a couple of sentries, whose stern gaze quite failed to notice her. Out in the streets, it wasn't so creepy, but she still felt oddly naked. It was unnerving being among people who were going about their own affairs and not bothering to look at one, when one's entire experience of the world hither to what it was revolved around one. Let me read that again. It was unnerving being around people who were going about their own affairs and not bothering to look at one, when one's entire experience of the world hitherto was that it revolved around one. Pedestrians bumped into one and rebounded away, wondering briefly that it was that they had hit, and one several times had to scurry away out of the path of wagons. The chicken leg hadn't gone far to fill the hole left by the absence of lunch, and she filched a couple of apples from a stall, making a mental note to have the chamberlain find out how much apples cost and send some money down to the stallholder. Disheveled, rather grubby, and smelling slightly of horse dung, she came at last to Cutwell's door. The knocker gave her some trouble. In her experience, doors opened for you. There were special people to arrange it. She was so distraught she didn't even notice that the knocker winked at her. She tried again, and thought she heard a distant crash. After some time, the door opened a few inches, and she caught a glimpse of a round, flustered face topped with curly hair. Her right foot surprised her by intelligently inserting itself in the crack. "I demand to see the wizard," she announced. "Pray admit me this instant." "He's rather busy at present," said the face. "Were you after a love potion?" "A what?" We've got a special on Cutwell's Shield of Passion Ointment," said the face, and winked in a startling fashion. "Provides your wild oats while guaranteeing a crop failure, if you know what I mean." Kelly battled. "No," she lied coldly. "I do not." "Ramrod, Maiden's Longstop, Belladonna Eye Drops." "I demand—" "Sorry, we're closed," said the face, and shut the door. Kelly withdrew her foot just in time. She muttered some words that would have amazed and shocked her tutors, and thumped on the woodwork. The tattoo of her hammering suddenly slowed as realization dawned. He'd seen her. He'd heard her. She beat on the door with renewed vigor, yelling with all the power in her lungs. A voice by her ear said, "It won't work. He is very stubborn." She looked around slowly and met the impertinent gaze of the door knocker. It waggled its metal eyebrows at her and spoke indistinctly through its wrought iron ring. "I am Princess Kelly, heir to the throne of Stolot," she said, haughtily, holding down the lid on her terror. "And I don't talk to door furniture." "Well, I'm just a door knocker, and I can talk to whoever I please," said the gargoyle pleasantly. "And I can tell you the master if having a trying day and does not want to be disturbed. But you could try to use the magic word," it added. Coming from an attractive woman, it works 9 times out of 8.
Magic word? What's the magic word?
The knocker perceptibly sneered. Have you been taught nothing, miss? She drew herself up to her full height, which wasn't really worth the effort. She felt he'd had a trying day too. Her father had personally executed 100 enemies in battle. She should be able to manage a door knocker. I have been educated, she informed it with icy precision, by some of the finest scholars in the land. The door knocker did not appear to be impressed. If they didn't teach you the magic word, it said calmly, they couldn't have been all that fine. Kelly reached out, grabbed the heavy ring, and pounded it on the door. The knocker leered at her. Treat me rough, he lisped. That's the way I like it.
You're disgusting.
Yef. Ooh, that wuss knife. Do it again. The door opened a crack. There was a shadowy glimpse of curly hair.
Madam, I said we were close.
Kelly sagged.
Please help me, she said. Please.
See, said the door knocker triumphantly. Say to her later, everyone remembers the magic word. Kelly had been to official functions in Ankh-Morpork and met senior wizards from Unseen University, the Disc's premier college of magic. Some of them had been tall, and most of them had been fat, and nearly all of them had been richly dressed, or at least thought they were richly dressed. In fact, there are fashions in wizardry, as in more mundane arts, and this tendency to look like elderly aldermen was only temporary. Previous generations had gone in for looking pale and interesting, or druidical, or grubby, or mysterious, and saturnine. But Kelly was used to wizards as a sort of fur-trimmed small mountain with a wheezy voice, and Igneous Cutwell didn't quite fit the mage image. He was young. Well, that couldn't be helped. Presumably even wizards had to start off young. He didn't have a beard, and the only thing his rather grubby robe was trimmed with was frayed edges.
Would you like a drink or something?
He said, surreptitiously, kicking a discarded vest under the table. Kelly looked around for somewhere to sit that wasn't occupied with laundry or used crockery, and shook her head. Cutwell noticed her expression.
It's a bit al fresco, I'm afraid,
he added hurriedly, elbowing the remains of a garlic sausage onto the floor.
Mrs. Nugent usually comes in twice a week and does it for me. She's gone to see her sister, who's had one of her turns. Are you sure? It's no trouble. I saw a spare cup here only yesterday.
I have a problem, Mr. Cutwell, said Kelly.
Hang on a moment.
He reached up to a hook over the fireplace and took down a pointy hat that had seen better days, although from the look of it they hadn't been very much better, and then said,
Right, fire away.
What's so important about the hat?
Oh, it's very essential. You've got to have the proper hat for wizarding. We wizards know about this sort of thing.
If you say so.
Look, can you see me?
He peered at her.
Yes, I would definitely say I can see you.
And hear me. You can hear me, can you?
Loud and clear. Yes, every syllable, tinkling into place, no problems.
Then would you be surprised if I told you that no one else in this city can?
Except me?
Kelly snorted. And your door knocker. Cutwell pulled out a chair and sat down. He squirmed a little. A thoughtful expression passed over his face. He stood up, reached behind him, and produced a flat, reddish mash which might have once been half a pizza. He stared at it sorrowfully.
I've been looking for that all morning, would you believe? He said. It was an all-on with extra peppers, too.
He picked sadly at the squash shape and suddenly remembered Kelly.
Gosh, sorry, he said. Where's my manners? Whatever will you think of me? Here, have an anchovy, please.
Have you been listening to me? Snapped Kelly.
Do you feel invisible? And yourself, I mean, said Cutwell instinctively.
And now for an aside about the first pizza on the disc. The first pizza was created on the disc by the Clatchian mystic Ron Revelation Joe Shuabi, who claimed to have been given the recipe in a dream by the creator of the Discworld himself, who had apparently added that it was what he had intended all along. Those desert travelers who had been seen the original, which is reputedly miraculously preserved in the forbidden city of EE, said that what the creator had in mind then was a fairly small cheese and pepperoni affair with a few black olives. And things like mountains and seas got added on out of the last minute enthusiasm, and so often happens. After the schism of the Turnwise Ones and the death of some 25,000 people in the ensuing jihad, the faithful were allowed to add one small bay leaf to the recipe. I love it.
Of course not. I just feel angry. So I want you to tell my fortune.
Well, I don't know about that. It all sounds rather medical to me, and
I can pay.
It's illegal, you see, said Cutwell wretchedly. The old king expressly forbade fortune-telling in Stolat. He didn't like wizards much.
I can pay a lot.
Mrs. Nugent was telling me this new girl is likely to be worse. A right haughty one, she said. Not the kind to look kindly on practitioners of the subtle arts, I fear.
Kelly smiled. Members of the court who had seen that smile before would have hastened to drag Cutwell out of the way and into a place of safety like the next continent. But he just sat there, trying to pick bits of mushrooms out of his robe. I understand she's got a foul temper on her, said Kelly. I wouldn't be surprised if she didn't turn you out of the city anyway.
Oh dear, said Cutwell. Do you really think so?
Look, said Kelly, you don't have to tell my future, just my present. Even she couldn't object to that. I'll have a word with her if you like, she added magnanimously.
Cutwell brightened. Oh, do you know her? He said.
Yes, but sometimes I think not very well.
Cutwell sighed and burrowed around in the debris on the table, dislodging cascades of elderly plates and the long mummified remains of several meals. Eventually, he unearthed a fat leather wallet stuck to a cheese slice. Well, he said doubtfully, these are character cards, distilled wisdom of the ancients and all that. Or there's the Chingaling of the Hublandish. It's all the rage in the smart set. I don't do tea leaves.
I'll try the Ching thing.
You throw these yarrow stalks in the air, then. She did. They looked at the ensuing pattern. Said Cutwell after a while. Well, that's one in the fireplace, one in the cocoa mug, one in the street, shame about the window, one on the table, and two behind the dresser. I expect Mrs. Nugent will be able to find the rest.
You didn't say how hard. Shall I do it again?
No, I don't think so. Cutwell fumbled through the pages of a yellow book that had previously been supporting the table leg. The pattern seems to make sense. Yes, here we are. Octogram 8887. Illegality, the unatoning goose. Which we cross-reference here. Hold on. Yes, got it.
Well?
Without verticality, wisely the cochineal emperor goes forth at tree time. At evening the mollusk is silent among the almond blossom.
Yes, said Kelly respectfully. What does that mean?
Unless you're a mollusk. Probably not a lot, said Cutwell. I think perhaps it lost something in translation.
Are you sure you know how to do this?
Let's try the cards, said Cutwell hurriedly, fanning them out. Pick a card, any card.
It's death, said Kelly.
Ah, well, of course. The death card doesn't actually mean death in all circumstances, Cutwell said quickly.
You mean it doesn't mean death in those circumstances where the subject is going overexcited and you're too embarrassed to tell the truth,
Look, take another card.
This one's death as well, said Kelly.
Did you put the other one back?
No. Shall I take another card?
May as well.
Well, there's a coincidence.
Death number 3?
Right. Is this a special pack for conjuring tricks?
Kelly tried to sound composed, but even she could detect the faint tinkle of hysteria in her voice. Cutwell frowned at her and carefully put the cards back in the pack, shuffled it, and dealt them out up to the table. There was only death. Oh dear, he said. I think this is going to be serious. May I see the palm of your hand, please? He examined it for a long time. After a while, he went to the dresser, took a jeweler's eyeglass out of a drawer, and wiped the porridge off it with the sleeve of his robe, and spent another few minutes examining her hand in minutest detail. Eventually, he sat back, removed the glass, and stared at her. You're dead, he said. Kelly waited. She couldn't think of any suitable reply.
I'm not,
lacked a certain style, while is it serious seemed somehow too frivolous.
Yeah, did I say I thought this was going to be serious? Said Cutwell.
I think you did,
Said Kelly carefully, keeping her tone totally level. I was right.
Oh.
It could be fatal.
How much more fatal, said Kelly, than being dead?
I didn't mean for you.
Oh.
Something very fundamental seems to have gone wrong, you see. You're dead in every sense but the, actual. I mean, the cards think you're dead. Your lifeline thinks you're dead. Everything and everyone thinks you're dead.
I don't, said Kelly. I don't, said Kelly,
but her voice was less than confident. I'm afraid your opinion doesn't count.
But people can see and hear me.
The first thing you learn when you enroll at Unseen University, I'm afraid, is that people don't pay much attention to that sort of thing. It's what their minds tell them that's important.
You mean people don't see me because their minds tell them not to?
Right so. It's called predestination or something. Cutwell looked at her wretchedly. I'm a wizard. We know about these things.
Actually, it's not the first thing you learn when you enroll.
Oh, wait, that's him. Actually, it's not the first thing you learn when you enroll, he added. I mean, you learn where the lavatories are and all that sort of thing before that, but after that, it's the first thing.
You can see me, though.
Ah, well, wizards are specially trained to see things that are there and not to see things that aren't. You get these special exercises.
Kelly drummed her fingers on the table, or tried to. It turned out to be different. She stared down in vague horror. Cutwell hurried forward and wiped the table with his sleeve.
Sorry, he muttered. I had treacle sandwiches for supper last night.
What can I do?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Well, you could certainly become a very successful burglar. Sorry, that was tasteless of me.
I thought so. Cutwell patted her ineptly on the head, and Kelly was too preoccupied even to notice such a flagrant lemagist.
You see, everything's fixed. History is all worked out from start to finish. What the facts actually are is beside the point. History just rolls straight over the top of them. You can't change anything because the changes are already part of it. You're dead. It's fated. You'll just have to accept it.
He gave an apologetic grin.
You're a lot luckier than most dead people. If you look at it objectively, he said. You're alive to enjoy it.
I don't want to accept it. Why should I accept it? It's not my fault.
You don't understand. History is moving on. You can't get involved in it anymore. There isn't a part in it for you, don't you see? Best to let things take their course. He patted her hand again. She looked at him. He withdrew his hand.
What am I supposed to do then? She said. Not eat because the food wasn't destined to be eaten by me? Go and live in a crypt somewhere?
Bit of a poser, isn't it? Said Cutwell. That's fate for you, I'm afraid. If the world can't sense you, you don't exist. I'm a wizard. We know.
Don't say it.
Kelly stood up.
5 generations ago, one of her ancestors had halted his band of nomadic cutthroats a few miles from the sound of Stolat and had regarded the sleeping city with a peculiarity determined expression that said, "This'll do. Just because you're born in the saddle doesn't mean you have to die in the bloody thing." Strangely enough, many of his distinctive features had, by a trick of heredity, been bequeathed to his descendant, accounting for his rather idiosyncratic attractiveness. They were never more apparent than now. Even Cutwell was impressed. When it came to determination, you could have cracked rocks on her jaw. In exactly the same tone of voice that her ancestor had used when he addressed his weary, sweary followers before the attack, she said, "No. No, I'm not going to accept it. I'm not going to dwindle into some sort of ghost. You're going to help me, wizard."
Princess Kelly's kicking ass.
Although not the droopy mustache and round furry hat with the spike on it, the speech has been passed on to later generations in an epic poem commissioned by his son, who wasn't born in a saddle and could eat with a knife and fork. It began, "See yonder the stolid foreman slumber, fat with stolen gold, corrupt of mind. Let the spears of your wrath be as the steppe fire on a windy day in the dry season. Let your honest blade thrust like the horns of a 5-year-old yak with a severe toothache." And went on for 3 hours. Reality, which can't usually afford to pay poets, records that in fact the entire speech ran, "Lads, most of them are still in bed. We should go around them like Kazakh fruit to a short grandmother, and I for one have had it right up here with you with yurts, okay?" Cutwell's subconscious recognized that tone. Just gonna check the time here. Cutwell's subconscious recognized that tone. It had harmonics in it that made even the woodworms in the floorboards stop what they were doing and stand to attention. It wasn't voicing an opinion. It was saying, "Things will be thus." "Me, madam?" he quavered. I don't see what I can possibly..." He was jerked out of his chair and out into the street, his robes billowing around him. Kelly marched towards the place with her shoulders set determinedly, dragging the wizard behind her like a reluctant puppy. It was with such a walk that mothers used to bear down on the local school with their little boy came around with a black eye. It was unstoppable. It was like the march of time. "What is it you intend?" Cutwell stuttered, horribly aware that there was going to be nothing he could do to resist whatever it was. "It's your lucky day, wizard." "Oh, good," he said weakly. "You've just been appointed Royal Recognizer." "Oh, what does that entail, exactly?" "You're going to remind everyone I'm alive. It's very simple. There's 3 square meals a day and your laundry done. Step lively, man." "Royal? You're a wizard." "I think there's something you ought to know," said the princess. And that's my phone alarm. It is 9:30 in the morning and I forgot to turn off my alarm. Be right back. "There is," said Death. That was a cinematic trip adapted for print. Death wasn't talking to the princess. He was actually in his study, talking to Mort. But it was quite effective, wasn't it? It's probably called a fast assault or a cross-cut zoom, or something. In industry where a senior technician is called a best boy might call it anything. "And what is that?" he added, winding a bit of black silk around the wicked hook in a little vise he'd clamped to the desk. Mort hesitated. Mostly, this is because of fear and embarrassment, but it was also because the sight of a hooded specter peacefully trying dry flies was enough to make anyone pause. Besides, Isabel was sitting on the other side of the room, ostensibly doing some needlework, but also watching him through a cloud of sullen disapproval. He could feel her red-rimmed eyes boring into the back of his neck. Death inserted a few crow hackles and whistled a busy little tune through his teeth. Not having anything else to whistle through, he looked up. "They didn't go as smoothly as I thought," said Mort, standing nervously on the carpet in front of the desk. "You had trouble," said Death, snipping off a few scraps of feather. "Well, you see, the witch wouldn't come away, and the monk, well, he started out all over again." "There's nothing to worry about there, lad." "Mort, you should have worked out by now that everyone gets what they think is coming to them. It's so much neater that way." I know, sir. But that means bad people who think they're going to some sort of paradise actually do get there. And good people who fear they're going to some kind of horrible place really suffer. It doesn't feel like justice." "What is it I've said you must remember when you're out on the duty?" "Well, you..." Mort stuttered into silence. "There's no justice. There's just you." "Well, You must remember that." "Yes, but..." I expect it all works out properly in the end. I have never met the Creator, but I'm told he's quite kindly disposed to people." Death snapped the thread and started to unwind with his voice. "Put such thoughts out of your mind," he added. "At least the third one shouldn't have given you any trouble." This was the moment. Mort had thought about it for a long time. There was no sense in concealing it. He'd upset the whole future course of history. Such things tend to draw themselves to people's attention. Best to get it off his chest. Own up like a man. Take his medicine. Cards on table. Beating around the bush. None of enough. Mercy, throwing himself on. The piercing blue eyes glittered at him. He looked back like a nocturnal rabbit trying to outstare the headlights of a 16-wheeled Arctic whose driver is a 12-hour caffeine freak outrunning the tachometers of hell. He failed. "No, sir," he said.
"Good. Well done. Now then, what do you think of this?"
Anglers reckon that a good dry fly should cunningly mimic the real thing. There are the right flies for morning. There are different flies for evening rise, and so on. But the thing between Death's triumphant digits was a fly from the dawn of time. It was the fly in the primordial soup. It had bread on mountain turds. It wasn't a fly that bangs on window panes. It was a fly that drills through walls. It was an insect that would crawl out from between the slats of the heaviest swat dripping venom and seeking revenge. Strange wings and dangling bits stuck out all over it. It seemed to have a lot of teeth. "What is it called?" said Mort.
"I shall call it Death's Glory."
Death gave the thing a fine admiring glance and stuck it into the hood of his robe.
"I feel inclined to see a little bit of life this evening," he said. "You can take the duty, now that you've got the hang of it, as it were."
"Yes, sir," said Mort mournfully. He saw his life stretching out in front of him, like a nasty black tunnel with no light at the end of it. Death drummed his finger on the desk, muttered to himself.
"Ah, yes," he said. "Albert tell me someone's been meddling in the library."
"Pardon, sir?"
"Taking books, leaving them lying around. Books about young women. He seems to think it is amusing."
As has already been revealed, the holy listeners have such well-developed hearing that they can hear deafened by a good sunset. Just for a few seconds, it seemed to Mort that the skin of his back of his neck was developing similar strange powers because he could see Isabel freeze in mid-stitch. He also heard the little intake of breath that he'd heard before among the shelves. He remembered the lace handkerchief. He said, "Yes, sir. It won't happen again." The skin on the back of his neck started to itch like a ferret.
"Splendid. Now you two can run along. Get Albert to do you a picnic lunch or something. Get some fresh air. I've noticed the way you two always avoid each other."
He gave Mort a conspiratorial nudge. It was like being poked with a stick, and added,
"Albert's told me what that means."
"Has he?" said Mort gloomily. He'd been wrong. There was a light at the end of the tunnel, and it was a flamethrower. Death gave him another of his supernova winks. Mort didn't return it. Instead, he turned and plodded towards the door as a general speed and gait that made great Atuin look like a spring lamb. He was halfway along the corridor before he heard the soft rush of footsteps behind him, and a hand caught his arm. "Mort," he turned and gazed at Isabel through a fog of depression. "Why did you let him think it was you in the library?" "No. It was very kind of you," she said cautiously. "Was it? I can't think what came over me." He felt in his pocket and produced the handkerchief. "This belongs to you, I think." "Thank you." She blew her nose noisily. Mort was already well down the corridor, his shoulders hunched like vultures' wings. She ran after him. "I say," she said. "What?" "I wanted to say thank you." "It doesn't matter," he muttered. "It'd just be best if you don't take books away again. It obsessed them or something." He gave what he considered to be a mirthless laugh. "Ha!" "Ha what?" "Ha what?" "Just ha!" He reached the end of the corridor. There was the door into the kitchen where Albert would be leering knowingly, and Mort decided he couldn't face that. He stopped. "But I only took the books for a bit of company," she said behind him. He gave in. "We could have a walk in the garden," he said in despair, and then managed to harden his heart a little and said, "Without obligation, that is." "When you mean you're not going to marry me," she said. Mort was horrified. "You mean you're not going to marry me?" she said. Mort was horrified. Marry? Isn't that what Father brought you here for? She said. He doesn't need an apprentice after all.
You mean all the nudges and winks and little comments about someday, my son, all this will be yours? Said Mort. I tried to ignore them. I don't want to get married to anyone yet, he added, suppressing a fleeting mental picture of the princess. And certainly not to you. No offense meant.
I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man on the disc, she said sweetly.
Let's try that again.
I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man on the disc, she said sweetly.
Mort was hurt by this. It was one thing not to want to marry someone, but quite another to be told they didn't want to marry you. At least I don't look like I've been eating donuts in a wardrobe for years, he said, as they stepped out onto Death's black lawn.
At least I walk as if my legs only have one knee each, she said.
My eyes aren't two juggly poached eggs,
Isabel nodded. On the other hand, my ears don't look like something growing on a dead tree. What does juggly mean?
You know, eggs, like Albert does them.
With the white all sticky and runny and full of slimy bits? Yes. A good word, she conceded thoughtfully. But my hair, I put it to you, doesn't look like something you clean a privy with.
Certainly, but neither does mine look like a wet hedgehog.
Pray note that my chest does not appear to be a toast rack in a wet paper bag.
Mort glanced sideways at the top of Isabel's dress, which contained enough puppy fat for 2 litters of Rottweilers, and bored to comment. My eyebrows don't look like a pair of mating caterpillars, he hazarded.
True, but my legs, as you suggest, could at least stop a pig in a passageway.
Sorry?
They're not bandy, she explained.
Ah.
They strolled through the lily beds, temporarily lost for words. Eventually, Isabel confronted Mort and stuck out her hand. He shook it in thankful silence. Enough, she said.
Just about.
Good. Obviously, we shouldn't get married, if only for the sake of the children.
Mort nodded. They sat down on a stone seat between some neatly clipped box hedges. Death had made a pond in the corner of the garden, fed by an icy spring that appeared to be vomited into the pool by a stone lion. Fat white carp lurked into the depths of eps, or nosed in the surface among the velvety black water lilies.
They should have brought some breadcrumbs, said Mort gallantly, opting for a totally non-controversial subject. He never comes out here, you know, said Isabel, watching the fish. He made it to keep me amused.
It didn't work?
It's not real, she said. Nothing's real here. Not really real. He just liked to act like a human being. He's trying really hard at the moment. Have you noticed? I think you're having an effect on him. Did you know he tried to learn the banjo once?
I see him as more of an organ type.
He couldn't get the hang of it, said Isabel, ignoring him. He can't create, you see.
You said he created the pool.
It's a copy of one he saw somewhere. Everything's a copy. Mort shifted uneasily. Some small insect had crawled up his leg.
It's rather sad,
he said, hoping that this was approximately the right tone to adopt. Yes. She scooped up a handful of gravel from the path and began to flick it absent-mindedly into the pool. Are my eyebrows that bad?
Said Mort.
Afraid so. Oh. Flick, flick. The carp were watching her disdainfully. And my legs? He said.
Yes. Sorry.
Mort shuffled anxiously through his limited repertoire of small talk and gave up.
Never mind, he said gallantly.
At least he can use tweezers. He's very kind, said Isabel, ignoring him, in a sort of absent-minded way.
He's not exactly your real father, is he?
My parents were killed crossing the Great Neff years ago. There's a storm, I think. He found me and brought me here. I don't know why he did it.
Perhaps he felt sorry for you.
He never feels anything. I don't mean that nastily, you understand. It's just that he's got nothing to feel with. No, what-do-you-call-it, no glands. He probably thought sorry for me. She turned her pale round face towards Mort. I won't hear a word against him. He tries to do his best. It's just that he's always got so much to think about.
My father was a bit like that. I mean.
I expect he's got glands, though.
I imagine he has, said Mort, shifting uneasily. It's not something I've ever really thought about. Glands.
They stared side by side at the trout. The trout stared back.
I just upset the entire history of the future, said Mort.
Yes?
You see, when he tried to kill her, I killed him, but the thing is, according to the history, she should have died, and the Duke would be king, but the worst bit is that although he's absolutely rotten to the core, he'd unite the cities, and eventually there'll be a federation, and the books say there'll be 100 years of peace and plenty. I mean, you'd think there'd be a reign of terror or something, but apparently, history needs this kind of person sometimes, and the princess would just be another monarch. I mean, not bad, quite good really, but just right now, it's not going to happen, and history is flapping around loose, and it's all my fault. He subsided anxiously, awaiting her reply.
You were right, you know.
I was?
We ought to have brought some breadcrumbs, she said. I suppose they find things to eat in the water, beetles and so on.
Did you hear what I said?
What about?
Oh, nothing. Nothing much, really. Sorry.
Isabel sighed and stood up. I expect you'll be wanting to get off, she said. I'm glad we got this marriage business sorted out. It was quite nice talking to you.
We could have a sort of hate-hate relationship, said Mort.
I don't normally get to talk with the people Father works with. She appeared to be unable to draw herself away, as though she was waiting for Mort to say something else.
Well, you weren't, was all he could think of. I expect you've got to go off to work now.
I expect you've got to go off to work now.
More or less,
Mort hesitated, aware that in some indefinable way the conversation had drifted out of the shallows and was now floating over some deep bits he didn't quite understand. There was a noise like... It made Mort recall the old yard at home, with a pang of homesickness. During the harsh ram-top winters, the family kept hardy mountain darga beasts in the yard, chucking in straw as necessary. After the spring thaw, the yard was several feet deep and had quite a solid crust on it. You could walk across it if you were careful. If you weren't and sank knee-deep into the concentrated jippo, then the sound you brute made as it came out, green and steaming, was as much as the sound of the turning year as a bird song and bee buzz.
I'm not sure what most of those words meant.
It was that noise. Mort instinctively examined his shoes. Isabel was crying, not in a little ladylike sobs, but in great yawning gulps, like bubbles from an underwater volcano fighting one another to be the first to the surface. There were sobs escaping under pressure, matured in humdrum misery. Mort said, Her body was shaking like a waterbed in an earthquake zone. She fumbled urgently in her sleeves with a handkerchief, but it was no more use in the circumstances than the paper hat in a thunderstorm. She tried to say something, which became a stream of consonants punctuated by sobs. Mort said, I said, how old do you think I am?
15, he hazarded.
I'm 16, she wailed. And do you know how long I've been 16 for?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
No, you wouldn't. No one would. She blew her nose again, and despite her shaking hands, nevertheless carefully tucked the rather damp hanky back up her sleeve. You're allowed out, she said. You haven't been here long enough to notice. Time stands still here. Haven't you noticed? Oh, something passes, but it's not real time. He can't create real time.
Oh.
When she spoke again, it was in the thin, careful, and above all brave voice of someone who has pulled themselves together despite overwhelming odds, but might let go at the very moment. I've been 16 for 35 years.
Well, that's horrifying. That's really horrifying.
Oh? It was bad enough at the first year. Mort looked back at his last few weeks, and nodded in sympathy. Is that why you've been reading all these books? He said. Isabel looked down and twiddled a sandaled toe in the gravel in an embarrassed fashion. They're very romantic, she said. There's some really lovely stories. There was this girl who drank poison when a young man had died, and there was one who jumped off a cliff because her father insisted she rather marry this old man, and another one drowned herself rather than submit to... Mort listened in astonishment. To judge by Isabel's careful choice of reading matter, it was a matter of note for any disc female to survive adolescence long enough to wear out a pair of stockings. And then she thought he was dead, and she killed herself, and then he woke up, and so he did kill himself, and then there was the girl. Common sense suggested that at least a few women reached their third decade without killing themselves for love, but common sense didn't seem to even get a walk-on part in these dramas. Mort was already aware that love made you feel hot and cold and cruel and weak, but he hadn't realized that it could make you stupid. The disc's greatest lovers were undoubtedly Melius and Gretelina, whose pure, passionate, and soul-searing affair would have scorched the pages of history if they had not, because of some unexplained quirk of fate, been born 200 years apart on different continents. However, the gods took pity on them and turned them into an ironing board, and her into a small brass bollard. When you're a god, you don't have to have reasons. Swam the river every night, but one night there was a storm, and when he didn't arrive, Mort felt instinctively that some young couples met, say, at a village dance and hit it off, and went out together for a year or two, had a few rows, made up, got married, and didn't kill themselves at all. He became aware that the litany of star-crossed love had wound down. "Ow," he said weakly. "Doesn't anyone just get along anymore?" "To love is to suffer," said Isabel. "There's got to be lots of dark passion." "Has there?" "Absolutely. And anguish." Isabel appeared to recall something. "Did you say something about something flapping around loose?" she said in the tight voice of someone pulling themselves together. Mort considered. "No," he said. "I'm afraid I wasn't paying much attention." "It doesn't matter at all." They strolled back to the house in silence. When Mort bent back to the study, he found that Death had gone, leaving 4 hourglasses on the desk. The big leather book was lying on the lectern, securely locked shut. There was a note tucked under the glasses. Mort had imagined that Death's handwriting would either be Gothic or else tombstone angular. But Death had, in fact, studied a classic work of graphology before selecting a style and had adopted a hand that indicated a balanced, well-adjusted personality. It said, "Gone fishing. There is in execution in Pseudopolis, a natural in Krull, a fatal fall in the Carrick Mountains, and Ong in El Kinty. The rest of these days are yours." Just basically Death's screwing off again, leaving it all to Mort. Yep, let's see here. We are at hour and 7. I feel that's a good place to stop for right now. Might read a little bit more later. Who knows? For anyone who enjoyed watching that, thank you. Have a time.